I have a follow-up and an update to two of my videos. Back in July of 2019, I released how the brain and the body work together. Then recently, the corona pandemic, don't take it sitting down. But I watched Dr. Mindy Pelz's video, Reset Your Immune System to Protect Yourself from Viruses, and I realized I can tie those two together. Here she's talking about the vitalistic versus mechanistic models of the immune system, debated back in 1919 when we had the Spanish flu pandemic. Is the immune system alive, a living creature reacting to the world, the vitalistic, or is it just a machine? That's a mechanistic. The mechanistic model won. The model I'm going to present, however, is definitely vitalistic. In fact, I even have a mechanism for it. And here she is talking about what weakens your immune system. Poor diet, lack of sleep, lack of movement, highly toxic load, that's metals, fight or flight brain, and chronic inflammation. Now, all these videos are linked below, obviously. Included is a link to join Dr. Pelz's Reset Academy online. Now, I'm not going to cover anything in depth that I've already covered in other videos or anything Dr. Pelz has covered. I'm just going to, the most of this video is just going to be me skimming over things that I've already covered before. Enough for you to keep up, but if you want details, go to the other videos. I am going to bring in a lot of stuff that's going to seem very strange and out of scope for this video. Just pencil it in and I'll tie it all together in the end. Now there are two caveats here. First, this is a novel virus. This is new. It can still blindside your immune system, can still make you sick, put you in the hospital, even kill you. The excellent news is that it typically relies on the kindness of strangers to kill you. Opportunistic infection from other bacteria or fungus and such. So if you follow this prescription, even if you do get sick, you'll probably recover a lot quicker. Secondly, there have been major breakthroughs in the war against the coronavirus. I'll link a video below. Social distancing has worked because social distancing has worked. It's broken the back of the corona pandemic. It's broken the back of the flu. So we have a lot fewer people getting the flu than we otherwise would have, and therefore dying from it. It's really fantastic. Also, a big surprise is we have a lot of treatments that seem to be working. You have the hydroxychloroquine used for malaria, autoimmune diseases as well, like lupus or arthritis. I know somebody who's on it for arthritis. You combine it with zinc, combine it with a Z-Pack to fight those other opportunistic infections. Seems to be working pretty well. We have plasma transfusions from people who have immunity to people who don't have immunity. Seems to be conferring temporary immunity. So a lot of stuff is working, coming along very nicely. This video is actually, I think, getting kind of late to the party. Now, with all that in mind, let's take a look at my model. All philosophy begins with Aristotle and Plato. These two are the center of the world, as you can see here in Raphael's painting, the School of Athens. It has been said by people who do this kind of thing for a living that every philosopher since Plato and Aristotle just wrote commentaries on Plato and Aristotle. These two men are like quantum mechanics and relativity. They're both right, and yet neither one of them makes sense when you rub them up against the other. As such, when we talk about the mind's and the spirit's relationship with the body, which we're talking about here, we have two completely different models on how they fit together, which in turn gives us different views of what happens to us after we die, and even, believe it or not, two different Christianities. The first view is souls from the realm of light are trapped in our realm of darkness. And not everything that walks on two legs like a human or speaks with a human voice is actually a human being with a soul. As you can see here in the so-called Apocryphon of John, or Secret Book of John, it is the demiurge Yaldabaoth who rules over this world. You might know him as Yahweh, the God of Israel, the Creator God. This group of Christians are known to historians and theologians as the Gnostics. With people like the Gnostics, the human body was at best a tattered garment worn by a trapped soul. But if you really think about what they teach about the physical world, the physical body is a parasite that sucks off the power of the soul. Thus, they did not believe in a physical resurrection, including Jesus's. In fact, some of them don't even believe Jesus was really here physically. They believed he was an illusion. But Jesus was a Jew, so unless you can demonstrate to me he was actually a Platonic philosopher and not a Jew, Jesus, like every other Jew, is a de facto Aristotelian. There is no alienation between the body and the soul because the body is the soul, and the soul is the body. You can't split them up. The soul is like a great tree with two different sets of roots, one of them firmly embedded in heaven, the other in the earth. Orthodox Christianity, like Judaism, is Aristotelian and therefore almost certainly right. Both the Gnostics and the Orthodox agree that we live in a fallen world, but we disagree on why it's fallen. We believe the world was originally good and that our actions caused it to fall. But the Gnostics believe that the world was itself evil. Now, in this particular case, for this particular group of Gnostics, they believed who they called Yadabaoth. Now, that's actually Yahweh, the creator of the universe. Yaldabaoth was a misshapen, chaotic abortion who sprung out of the body of his mother, Sophia. She's a deity in the realm of light. But Yaldabaoth never completely detached from her, and he spun the universe out of her like a cancer. And so for the Gnostics, the serpent in the Garden of Eden was always the good guy. Now, I like the Gnostics a lot. They're very subtle, many of them quite brilliant, some of the smartest people in the early church. But they were mistaken in that they thought they were theologians when in fact they're psychologists, as C.G. Jung pointed out. So now as we go from there, we're going to ask ourselves a question, because whether you're Gnostic or whether you're Orthodox, you're going to have two different answers to this question. What happens after we die? For the Gnostics, you either go into oblivion if you're not actually a human being with a soul, or you escape into the realm of light. Now, let me explain. Just because, and I think we've all met these people, just because someone walks on two legs and speaks with a human voice doesn't mean they're human. For example, when Dante was in hell, he saw a guy there who's like, well, this guy's still alive. And Virgil says, no, he's actually dead. He's so evil, God went ahead and sent him to hell. His body's inhabited by a demon. So you either escape in the realm of light or you go to oblivion, or for some cases, you're reincarnated until you get into the realm of light. But what really happens? Okay, now C.G. Jung talks about the land of the dead, and he says it's a part of nature. And you could treat it just like it's any part of nature, and that's what I'm going to do here. The part that follows is going to be very weird, but it's also very dangerous. When you're talking about the land of the dead, keep your Bible firmly in hand. Do not go one step beyond where Jesus wants you to go. Do not consult a medium to talk to the denizens of the land of the dead. A medium is just a soft-shoe way of saying witch, and witches get thrown into hell. If you consult witches, they'll drag you down with them. Nevertheless, I'm pretty sure that God sent my grandmother Dorothy as an angel, a messenger. Angel just means messenger. Okay? There were two encounters, spaced 20 years apart. Each encounter was of a totally different character from the other. Now, for all this time, I thought it was very strange that God would send my grandmother as an angel from the land of the dead. But I knew it was a matter of time before I'd figure it out, because he sent it to me for a reason, and figure out why she showed up in the manner that she did. And as I was researching this video, I indeed figured it out. As I said, the world is a great tree, and when we die, the tree is fractured. The roots in heaven remain in heaven. Our ancestors can see these roots and even interact with them. Like a tree, they know when we're about to bear fruit. That is, they know when we are going to die. That's why it's very common for people dying in hospices and hospitals to be visited by their parents or spouses, or their children who've moved on before them. This explains an apparent contradiction in the Bible. Our bodies sleep in the grave, and yet we can somehow be away from the body and at home with the Lord. 2 Corinthians 5, 1 through 10. Well, how does that work? The fact that we sleep in the grave is confirmed in 1 Samuel. When the witch at Endor summons the Elohim of the prophet Samuel, she is disturbed asleep. This tells us that while this part of our soul does indeed sleep, it is not a permanent sleep. It can be summoned, and later it will be resurrected. Now, I know this sounds strange, and you might think I'm just pulling this out of thin air, but actually not. It's an observation that I made. It's a conclusion that I drew from an observation. But I'm not the first person to come up with this idea that the soul can be split up into different parts. The Egyptians believed the soul could be split up into 9 parts. Yeah. And the Egyptians and the Israelites were neighbors. As a matter of fact, during the time of Moses and for the centuries after, Egypt actually occupied most of what we call the modern day Israel, most of the Promised Land. The Egyptians occupied it. So from a purely secular view, it's not at all unlikely that the Egyptians would influence Israelites when it comes to their ideas about life after death. aside from the fact of simple observation, as I see here. Now, the ancient Chinese, the Egyptians weren't the only one. The ancient Chinese also thought the human soul had multiple parts. Now, by the way, this is called the Elohim of Samuel. You might have heard that Elohim is another name for God. And that's true, but an Elohim is not just God or a God. An Elohim is a mighty one, a shining one. And that's going to explain a baffling detail of my first encounter with my grandma. They're denizens. It's any denizen of the spiritual realm, including God. And gods, because yes, the other gods are real. Demons, and in this case, our dearly beloved. And of course, God is an Elohim. He is the Elohim of Elohims. He stands further above Zeus than Zeus does an earthworm. Now, my first encounter with grandmother Dorothy, here are the two encounters. The first was a dream I had right after she died. I'm in a car, I'm traveling down a one-lane road, and I'm in a forest with trees. And although they don't have leaves, they have very few leaves, they're so tightly packed together that I can't see past them. Now, grandmother Dorothy's in the car with me, and she looks amazing. And here's a baffling detail. Her eyes are burning like bronze. They're shining. But she looks eternal. But she still looks like grandma. It's a very stark contrast to the last time I saw her, a couple of hours before she died, barely struggling for death, barely struggling for breath. And I said, Grandma, you look amazing, especially those eyes. And she said, thank you. And that was the end of the dream. Now, as soon as I heard about the Elohim and how they shined, and as soon as I thought about this topic and brought it to bear on this topic, I knew that this was our Elohim. Now, the shine that I will show you is the Logos. This is the divine articulated will of God. This is the Jesus. It plays the universe like a symphony. It's embedded into everything that's alive, everything that's not alive. And this is why I'm confident, even in physical body, we are never completely dead. I call it a semi-permanent slumber. Now, without going into details about how I figured this out later, a couple of years back, the trees are my other ancestors. They've all crowded around me, and obviously they've sent my grandmother Dorothy as an emissary. She's just about the only one of them I would have known. Now, my next visit, I'm at my dinner table, and I really think grandmother Dorothy is there with me. And so I start chatting with her on what I'm up to, what I'm doing, and she's saying yes, and she seems to be enjoying the conversation. And then she's gone. Well, I miss Grandma, so kind of catching her up to date in my head. Nope, she was there. This is how I know. That night, I come home from work, and I decide I'm just going to go down a different road. So I'm traveling in a car down a road, and I get lost, and so I end up at a dead end. And right in front of my headlights is what do you think? A tree. And it's almost completely bare itself. All of a sudden, something walks into that tree from the thin air. It doesn't fly, it walks into it. It's really creepy. Something white, something pretty big. So I immediately think alien. Of course, these aliens kidnap people and experiment on them and sometimes kill them. They torture poor cattle to death and slice them up while they're still alive. So naturally, I step out of my car to check it out, and it's an owl, a big white owl. Now, I rarely see birds that big here in North Texas. I don't know that I ever do. And I've only seen like 3 owls in my life. Here's why it's important. The owl is my grandmother's animal. She had owls all over her house. And when she died, my mother put a figurine of a white owl into her coffin. It made my Uncle Charles pretty mad because he thought it was kind of vulgar, maybe a little bit disrespectful. Obviously, that's grandmother Dorothy telling me, yes, I was there in your apartment with you. And remember, angels have wings. Well, actually, they don't. An angel is just a messenger. Anything can come to you with a message, including God, and not everything has wings. The fact that they do, though, the fact that we think that angels have wings, tells us a lot of that we know instinctively what it's really like for the blessed who dwell with God in heaven. So when I start pulling this video together, I'm like, okay, that's why God sent her. It helped me figure out something about the Bible, something important. Clarify an apparent contradiction. Now, here's something else to keep in mind. This is a preview of the resurrection of the dead. Whereas here, Grandma Dorothy, her living spirit, is briefly touching down on a representation of her physical body. When we are resurrected, clearly, it seems to me, we're going to be summed up. We're going to be brought back together. All the different facets we're going to be back to our fullness, our pleroma, as the Gnostics would say. It just means the fullness. And once again, our roots, this time eternally, will stretch both down into heaven, down into earth, and up to heaven. Those of us who are not condemned. Also, I talk about these encounters in previous videos, so you can't say I made them up. Now, what is the Bible telling us about how the brain and the body work together? It doesn't talk at all about the brain, unless you think the mind is the brain, which nobody did at the time, including the writers of the Bible. And I don't anymore either. It just doesn't really fit to what's going on to our fullness. The Bible treats individual members of the body as if they're potentially independent, as if they can rebel against the whole body. And in my model, that's exactly what we see. I went over these quotes in How the Brain and the Body Work Together, so you can pause and read them if you'd like. Here we see that because the body is pulled from a fallen world, it hamstrings our ability to live in the spirit. Sometimes different members of the body can be at war with each other. One bad apple can spoil the whole barrel. Obviously, Jesus doesn't want you to cut your hand or your foot off, but if you're not careful and paying attention to what you're doing, they can weigh you down and drag you into hell. How is it that these things have a life of their own? Because despite the fallen state of the world, Jesus, the Logos, is still embedded within it, every single part of it, even the rocks and the dirt between the stars. So, how does this work out? For that, we turn to Aristotle. Now, a word first about the bigger picture. Now, as you know, most of us are evolutionists now, but the ground beneath our feet is not as secure as old Earth evolutionists would have you believe. When bats and cats and puppy dog tails first show up in the fossil record, there's no transition. There are already bats and cats and puppy dog tails. We're not only getting soft tissue out of dinosaur bones, we're also getting carbon-14 dates out of that soft tissue. That should be impossible under the old Earth evolutionary model. I'm not prepared to abandon it yet, but I will say this, get ready for some surprises. But even if you grant the old Earth evolutionary model in its entirety, it is still impossible without God. Maybe as late as the 1980s, atheists had plausible deniability. Not anymore. I'm sorry, we've learned just too much. Even the simplest organisms are fantastically complex, and that's nothing compared to us. We're machines, just like cars and planes, except we're made from different material. Our material is these ridiculously, fantastically complex folded proteins that only work if they're folded right. Okay? We are powered by electrical generators that work just like a generator in a hydroelectric dam. There's no difference. The only explanation for this is that there is an intelligence lurking in the universe and preceding the universe that comes before it, and it's moving the universe forward. Whether that intelligence is embedded in it or comes from outside of it or a little bit of both, I think that's the Bible's position. It's a different question, but there is no question about its reality. So now we can keep that in mind as we dive into Aristotle. His hylomorphic model suits our scientific observations just fine. Aristotle is still very much in play. The slides that follow are pulled from The Modeling of Nature by William A. Wallace. Like with the biblical passages, I work through them more carefully and how the brain and the body work together, so I'll just scan through them here. Aristotle talks about a natural form. Here's the natural form of an inanimate object, NFI. At its core is what is called protomatter. But as I've just discussed, there's an element of consciousness in this protomatter. Again, it might be embedded, or it might be coming from the outside, or it might be a little bit of both. That's actually the position of the Bible. So we read in Romans 8:22, we know that the whole creation has been groaning, as if in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. Psalm 66:4, all the earth bows down to you. They sing praise to you. They sing praises to your name. Taking my cue from the Gospel of John chapter 1, I call this consciousness the Logos. And since the natural form of plants is built on the natural form of inanimate objects, in the natural form of animals is built on the natural form of plants, with caveats we're discovering. We know now, for example, that plants feel pain and can talk to each other. They can even be anesthetized, just like a human. Oh, wow. We continue. Since the natural form of the human is built on the natural form of the animal, the logos is the kernel of everything in the universe, including dinosaurs. And since we have eyes that see the eternal things, like logical concepts and Platonic ideas, and since we can see abstracts, we must therefore have a fragment of our fullness which is itself eternal, which is confirmed by the straightforward experience of people at all times and in all places, as I demonstrated earlier when I talked about my conversations with Grandmother Dorothy. Acts of intellect are coupled with acts of will in a dynamic feedback loop. This is an example William Wallace uses. This is my example. For the past year and a half, I've intended to play the piano. I've been half-assing it for several months now, but I'm still working on it. I have a family reunion in July, so I've been picking up the pace on it lately. So what does this have to do with the brain? And what does this have to do with the coronavirus? Patience. Almost there. Once again, for what follows, I'm just going to skim through these slides. I go through them in much greater detail in how the brain and the body work together. We have a command control idea about how the brain and the body work together. Commands go down, response goes up, but I have a different model, one that frankly makes more sense. I call it the nested logos model. Every member of the body has a brain, and all their brains are centralized in our skulls. Every cell, embedded in every tissue, embedded in every organ, each with its own logos. Because once again, embedded deeply into everything in the universe is a whisper of consciousness, all the way down to the dirt and the dust, probably all the way down to the atomic level. The only difference between us and the dirt and the dust and the atoms is our consciousness is channeled and concentrated. It's kind of like how everything in the universe has gravity, which means it makes a dent in the space-time continuum. Yours and mine is dwarfed by the sun's, just as the sun's consciousness dent, shall we say, is dwarfed by our own. My nested model explains how everything can be so wonderfully choreographed. Do you really think your brain is commanding all your body parts to get together and spin around like this, and micromanaging while they do it? It's far more likely that the members know what to do, because while you were telling them you wanted to learn how to dance, they're paying attention to what you were telling them they needed to learn, so they learned how to do it. My idea isn't crazy at all. In fact, it's already been identified in nature. Every arm of an octopus has its own brain. Our gut and our digestive system has been known as our second brain for more than 20 years. It uses far more of the neurotransmitter serotonin than the brain does. This researcher in artificial intelligence thinks we have thousands of brains. He points out that our neocortex, the part of the brain where all of the mammalian heavy lifting takes place, is a series of structures that are repeated over and over again. My model of the brain is a cousin of his own, obviously. We're both telling you need to stop thinking of the brain in a uniform command and control manner. Although I would add just as obviously, my model is more radical and comprehensive, very much like general relativity compared to special relativity. The second being Einstein's original theory, the first is radical expansion on it. There are many, many things I could talk about from this video, but two things are especially apropos to it. First, he tells us that the neocortex of mammals was a big qualitative leap over anything that existed before. Qualitative. As an FYI, water slowly heating up is a quantitative change. Water flashing into steam is qualitative. We're talking about lightning and lightning bugs here. Once again, scientific research has so far proven this is impossible, lensed through an atheistic paradigm. There have been thousands and thousands of random mutations induced in animals. Not a single one of them has introduced a beneficial mutation. And then he tells us that with the neocortex, we have escaped the gravity of evolutionary pressure. For example, we are interested in cosmology, the origin of the universe, and music. Neither seems useful for evolutionary advancement, but if we have roots that extend into heaven, just as we have roots that extend into the earth, then these are actually critical to the nourishment and growth of our soul. Man does not live on bread alone. I used to get shin splints when I was jogging. If you're getting those, it's because you're landing on your heel with your foot in front of your body. And the reason why you're doing that is because you don't trust that your feet won't let you fall on your own face. In other words, you don't believe your feet have the brains to do that. Now, I talk about that in my video, Corona Pandemic, Don't Take It Sitting Down. I'll show you how to get over your shin splints. And let me do a quick rehash. So just do this. You stand up, you just lean forward and notice how your feet pop out in front of you automatically. Are you doing that consciously? Of course not. That'd be ridiculous. They just land out in front of you. Look down. You see the ball on your foot has landed on the floor and it's right under your body. That's the way you're supposed to land. And just parenthetically, when you're jogging, every once in a while, run on the grass in a park, something barefooted. There are a lot of fine controlled neurons and muscles that need to fire and need to get practiced. If you're like me, you go for decades in overbuilt shoes and your feet get kind of lazy because, they haven't their own intelligence. So of course they can get lazy. So since we're talking about intelligence in the coronavirus, we need to talk about something else. We need to talk about chaos. Now, scholars talk about something in literature called Chaos Kampf. It's German, the struggle against chaos. It's a major topic of conversation everywhere and among all people. Keeping order and concomitantly keeping chaos away, keeping it at bay, is why there was ever a king living in a palace and building a temple. Chaos is why we have mental illness. Chaos is why our body parts can be at war with each other, as the Bible says, as you see in your own experience. Mindless eating, fidgety hands, fidgety feet, fidgety, whatever. Something that can't keep in its pants. It's why we have immune system problems, why our immune system can go haywire. It's why we get cancer. Cancer cells are rebel cells. They won't stop proliferating, and they eat all the sugar and the carbohydrates you can get their pseudopods on. That's why it's important to go on a ketosis diet, or if you're on cancer, it's certainly a good idea to fast before you go into a chemotherapy. You don't have to fast all day, but why not? Your body can handle fasting. Cancer cells cannot. So now that we've been talking about chaos and nested brains and octopuses, you might be thinking of Medusa, the emblem par excellence of chaos of the body and the psyche. These conflicts lock us in a neurotic complex, like a stone statue. The ancients had plenty to say about chaos. This is the Enuma Elish, the great story of the creation of the cosmos as told by the Babylonians. Tiamat, the goddess sea monster, is chaos. Marduk, the great god of the Babylonians, kills her in battle and uses her body to create the universe. Here's how he does it. He blows a wind into her face and blows out her belly like a balloon. Then he pops it with his spear. Then he splits her in half like a clam and uses her parts to create heaven above and the land below. As I'll show you, the Bible takes specific aim at this story. And if the Bible is specifically taking aim at that story, don't you think you need to know that story? Of course you do. But the Bible also has some nuance on the subject of chaos. Among the local civilizations, chaos seems to have been something evil at all times that needs to be absolutely stamped out and destroyed. But is that really true? Is the chaos that naturally comes with young children evil? When you're creating something, art, literature, YouTube videos about the Bible, don't we have to wrestle with chaos? Doesn't it get our attention, challenge us, intrigue us? Is that evil? I mean, we want to jump in and fix it and make something out of it. Is that evil? Of course not. So now let's look at how the Bible's creation story deals with our Tiamat. Just exactly like the face of Tiamat, we have the face of the deep, the Tehom. This is Tiamat sublimated into an impersonal force of nature. Tehom sounds like Tiamat because it's the same word, except it's in Hebrew instead of Akkadian, and the gender is different. Tiamat is obviously feminine. As you can see here, Tehom is marked below as a noun that's CS, which means common singular. It's neither masculine nor feminine. It's neutral. And just as Marduk blows a wind into the face of Tiamat, the spirit of God, the Ruach, hovers over the face of the deep. Well, Ruach is also breath or wind. But instead of an evil wind blowing into the face of a monster, God's breath or wind was hovering over the face of the deep. And what can we pull out of this? Something very interesting. God's spirit hovers tenderly over the Tehom, like a great cosmic bird hovers over her brood. And to see how this works, you can compare this to Deuteronomy 32, 9 through 11, specifically verse 11. But there's something else going on here. We have God, and we have His Spirit, and they're both hovering over chaos like great cosmic birds hover over their brood. And the chaos is female in the original backstory. Where else do we see something almost exactly like this? Luke 1:35. The angel said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore the child to be born will be holy. He will be called Son of God. God and His Spirit will literally hover over their child." Then 3 verses later in 138 we read, "Then Mary said, Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." Then the angel departed from her. God created the cosmos with his word, and here in a special act of creation, just as if he's creating the whole universe again, he is creating through his word, the Son of God. Now the Bible actually has a chaos creature who is a counterpart to Tiamat, Leviathan. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook? Or press down its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in its nose? Or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it make many supplications to you? Will it speak soft words to you? Will it make a covenant with you, to be taken as your servant forever? Will you play with it as with a bird, or will you put it on a leash for your girls? Will traders bargain over it? Will they divide it up among the merchants? Can you fill its skin with harpoons, or its head with fishing spears? Lay hands on it. Think of the battle. You will not do it again. Any hope of capturing it will be disappointed. Were not even the gods overwhelmed at the sight of it? No one is so fierce as to dare to stir it up. Who can stand before it? Who can confront it and be safe? Under the whole heaven, who? So Leviathan is here, and he's dangerous, but he's also under control. But he won't always be. He's showing up again at the end of time. As I demonstrated in my video, There's a Christmas Story in Revelation, linked below, I demonstrated that, like God, Satan is a trinity. And as I'm demonstrating with my Pisces video for the Gospel of Mark and my Boot Camp for Saints series, which I plan on releasing Easter Sunday, Jesus also forms a trinity here on earth with his mother Mary and the so-called beloved disciple, which I have no doubt is the man Lazarus, whom he resurrected from the dead. So have faith in Jesus. He's got all of it under control. So now let's bring it all home. I'm going to use two examples of the embedded logos in action. The first I'm bringing forward from my video, How the Brain and the Body Work Together. And then my new example of how the brain and the body together make war on Corona. I want to learn how to play the piano. Each hand, every finger, both eyes, both ears need to be trained for this. But their brains are too small. Everything has to be done in short-term memory. Send more neurons so we can build bigger brains. The lesson I draw from this: we don't have intelligence because we have brains. We have brains because we have logos. Enter neurogenesis. The brain is always making new neurons. 10 times more neurons are created if you do cardio exercise like jogging, swimming, or HIIT. That's high intensity interval training. Highly recommended. 10 minutes of HIIT is as good as 30 minutes of jogging. It also works your whole body. If they're not needed, these new neurons, they die off. If they are, they mature and migrate to where they're needed. It takes 4 to 6 months. Now, they have bigger brains. Lesson: if you dwell on filth, you will become filth. However, if you dwell on the good and the noble, which we see here, you will become good and noble. Now let's go look at Corona. I've been invaded. Kill it, and watch out for those fellow travelers. I've already fasted 48 hours, which I do a couple of times a year anyway. Actually, probably about 3 times a year. The logos of my body use the digestive downtime to attack stray viruses, bacteria, and fungi, and clean up and replace weak links. This is called autophagy. So we've already fortified everything, got everything set up, ready to go in advance. I continue to exercise and get lots of sleep, fortifying the logos. I continue eating lots of good food and stay away from sugar because it hamstrings the logos, especially when you're sick. Afterwards, do the best you can. And that's it. That's how I think everything is put together, and that's how I think it works. I hope I made sense. I hope it is helpful, and I hope it has given you hope in these trying times. God bless.